Hello and welcome to Reimagining Education, a podcast from Michigan International Prep School. I'm your host, Eric Van Houten, and with me is Roy Sovis, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction here at MIPS. This is Roy's second time on the podcast. He was on it just a couple months ago, and he sparked a lot of important ideas, perspectives, and told a lot of your story there too. I'm all about education, so I thought today we would get into some of the specifics, something more, focus, something about that we're passionate about here at MIPS. So, I think this is the foundation of education, and a lot of family, students, even those that work at a school, don't think about this often. So that's enough vague things too. We're going to be talking a little bit about schools, grading, measuring learning, how we do that kind of thing. So Roy, thanks for being here. And I'm going to, let you do your welcome, but I'm going to set this over to you right here of you've got great ideas in education, grading, the things that we will talk about. So I want to set it over to you and say, hey, how does the current education system measure and work and all those things, and where can we improve? That's still vague, but
there's a lot there. No, thanks for having me again. This is a very interesting, topic to me about, evaluating, student performance, and it's a very emotional topic. Emotional topic. Has a history to it about where we are today. And it's the ideas that I have about it, I would say they're not all my original ideas. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great people out there with great minds that are writing about these issues and talking about these issues. And where we are in education now with grading, it's evolved, and we kind of have a mixed bag right now. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about what you would say is like, what is the current grading system, or what has it been? I think we got to start a little bit previous to 20 years ago, because about 20 years ago, there was always rumblings about how we evaluated students for a long, long time, but it really didn't come to fruition of really changing from what the old system was to what we have now until standards came on the scene. And
was that early 2000s?
Well, being standards-based has been around for a long time, 40, 50 years, thinking about, having standards. But I think it was in the state of Michigan, really, we didn't move in that direction until the late 70s, early 80s. And I think English language arts was the first subject that said, we're going to put out a set of standards. And then they've evolved from there. And the idea that standards being kind of the pivotal time, when those came on the scene and they become more formalized, it was really about looking at courses and saying, okay, if a student is going to take Algebra 1, what makes Algebra 1 Algebra 1? Mm-hmm. And so prior to that, it was up to the classroom teacher that decided all that, okay? Now, a lot of times there'd be overlap with that, and you could take any other course, English language arts for 9th grade, or a geography course or world history course, but a lot of it was left to the classroom teacher, their background and that kind of thing that would build that course. And what that made that course was a lot of, whatever they put into it. So standards came along to kind of standardize what students should know and be able to do at the end of a course. And throughout this country, every state has adopted some kind of set of standards for every grade level. And they first came out in grade bands, but then they moved to grade level. So that movement really took and brought to the surface how we evaluate students, because there was a term that came on the scene as we need to move in the direction of standards-based grading. And then people said, well, that's a very difficult move. Maybe we'll call it standards reference grading. Okay, so there's a couple terms out there.
Seems less clear, but
could be less clear. But the bottom line is everybody's on the same page, is that how do we know when a student takes a course and they've been successful? What does that mean? How do we define that? What level of criteria do they meet? That kind of thing. So let's back up a little bit. Probably yourself in your K-12 experience and in your college years, same thing with me, we experienced the traditional 100% scale, okay? So that came on the scene around the 40s, where that came along with the A through F kind of a letter. We're going to put a letter that's tied to these percentages.
Sometimes E because it looks nicer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then along with it was the GPA. Okay, we got a GPA. Now, that movement in that direction really took place to kind of standardize, or not standardize, streamline. Streamline's a better word, not standardize. Streamline the communication about student performance between educational institutions. Okay, so we ran with that. The problem with that 100% scale is that it's extremely subjective. And most people, if you don't stop and think about it, then you think, oh, I got an A in a course, or I got a B. And, some kids are good with a C, some are good with a B, and it depends on their interest level. And yeah, I'm not a math person. I was lucky to get a C in algebra. I'll take it, right? And then we know we have other students who are striving for, that 4.0 because they want to be valedictorian, and they're going to be ahead above everybody, right? And all of that goes back to this 100% scale. Well, what's interesting is if you were to talk to 100 different teachers, randomly selected across this country, that used the 100% scale, it would all be meaningless because they would all decide themselves what in there. So if you could line up 10 Algebra 1 teachers, or say chemistry teachers, or even say a third grade teacher on how they evaluated students in science at the third grade level, and say, how do you determine that they've learned and been successful? And they would all explain how they would do it, and they'd all have their reasoning, but no two teachers would be the same. So is that good or bad? Well, there's some pros and cons to that. But if we want to focus in on learning, the 100% scale distracts us from really looking at students and their learning. And here's why. One, they go after the grade. Okay, so what goes into a grade, right? So the problem is at the end, you can have a whole list of things, and I jotted a few down. One, that what we see goes into a grade right now in a classroom is behavior. Okay, so kids can be marked down or given points for certain behaviors they exhibit. Some are marked down for late work. Oh, it's late. You didn't meet the deadline. So even though you did the assignment and you demonstrated you understood everything, because it's late, you're penalized 50%. Okay? Extra credit. But I'm at 88% and I want an A minus. Well, bring in a Kleenex box. I need Kleenex for next year, or whatever the case may be, right? Give you 2% for that. What about attendance? Well, you missed 10 days, so sorry, we're going to mark you down.
It's big in college.
Big in college, yeah. Group scores. We've all experienced having to do a group assignment, and you got one or two people that do all the work, and you get the grade that they do. Or the flip side is, wait a second, I earned an A for the group, but those two are getting an A and they did nothing? Could be just punishment. Teacher takes away points for whatever. They're doing an activity in the classroom and said, you didn't follow the rules, so I'm taking points away from you or your group. All this goes into a grade. Poorly organized evidence. So we also have this idea of weighting stuff, right? So it's a question now is, well, how much does my final exam weigh? How much percentage of the grade is it? 10%, 15%, 20%?
That's huge.
How much is my homework? And so you have some teachers, 50% homework, 20% final grade, and 30% other. So kids will play the game just to get a passing grade. It's not about learning in that case. It's about how do I play the game to get the points I need just so I can get past this class. It distracts from learning. Practice. Should students be penalized for practice?
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's do a sports analogy.
Yeah.
So when does it count? Right? It's March Madness, right? Okay. So
I'm currently in the lead in the MIPS bracket.
Are
by the
you?
way. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Nice. Okay. Well, see, we even take it to the point because it's entertainment for us. We love competition. We love seeing that. We love supporting our teams. That we go to do this bracket, right? And we try to compete with one another, how we select the teams. But you think about that. For a college basketball team, there's a couple measures that they use. One is their conference championship. Usually that's the number one goal, conference championship. Number two is to then, another one would be to beat their rival. We all have these rivals, right? So that would be another success point for them, that they'd say, part of our criteria in measuring how successful we are as a team is, do we win our conference? Do we beat our rival? And how far can we get in the NCAA tournament, with our goal always being the number one team in the country? Right? So they got three things they're looking at as a team. So when they go practice and they might scrimmage and maybe bring in a separate team or something, does that penalize them? If they don't do well, are they penalized for their poor practice on their criteria? No. Their practices, we're trying to get better. So when it counts is what we would call a summative evaluation is, did you win your conference?
Yeah.
Right? And along the way, they might have some poor performances, but they respond to those and they get feedback from those performances, and they get feedback from the coach. They get feedback from others and their own playing, their own thoughts about what they're doing to improve their skill set to always get better. But their practice does not work against them. It doesn't penalize them for their over and how they're measuring their success for the year.
Yeah.
Okay. So the same thing with schoolwork. If we want kids to, say, learn how to implement safety measures for doing lab work. Okay. So it's the beginning of a science course, high school, maybe 9th grade. And we're going to do lab work. And we're teaching them safety precautions, right? So as they go through and we put them through some activities to see where they are in their learning, should they be penalized when they make a mistake while they're learning? Probably not. Is it fair? I don't know. People can argue for and against it. But that's when you talk about practice, is they will say, if we give kids homework, and this is where it gets into effective grading practices that I mentioned last time. If we give kids assignments, and those assignments that they do impact their final grade for the course, then what's the purpose of that assignment? Is it to find out where they are at the end of their learning? Well, then maybe it should. But if that is to get them to do work, then you're trying to motivate kids by grades, which that's a whole nother conversation. But if the idea is to give them that assignment to see where they are in their learning and give them feedback, why should they be penalized if they get stuff wrong?
Yeah.
It should really be about, hey, look at this. I'd be purposeful in the assignment. And this is where you think about grading. It should impact every teacher's thinking about, why did I give that assignment? What's the purpose of that assignment? What does it do for me? There's a lot of busy work out there. We give kids assignments all day long. Yeah. But what does it do? Oh, we put a grade in a grade book. We got to build our grades. We got to have 18 things in our grades. Well, so are you focusing on learning? See how it distracts from learning?
Yeah, I've never heard it. So you're articulating this better than I've ever heard it before. I'm not a big, education theory reader, things like that. But, no solutions are coming to my mind, but I've never heard it articulated this way. And it makes so much sense, or at least the apparent flaws are clear. Clear. Yeah. I don't want to stop you if there's more on your list either, but it makes sense.
Yeah, that's the practice one, which I think has a big impact, because that trickles down to any educator saying, why am I giving this assignment? What's the purpose? And how is it designed? We could take that a step further and say, when we have a group of students, say in Algebra 1, where a student is gifted in math for whatever reason, could be genetics, could be experience with the family, could be a number of things that led that student to be interested in mathematics and really excel at it without really working real hard at it. They just clicks for them. To other kids at the other end of the spectrum, it's not that they can't learn. It's not that they won't learn it. It's just that, one, they may not be interested in mathematics. One, that it's just they haven't had a whole lot of experience. They have to work a little bit harder. Whatever the case may be, thinking about how your purpose of assignment, what the purpose of assignment is and how it's constructed, then allows a teacher to go to that next level and say, let me look at the complexity of my assignments. And maybe I design those in 3 different ways. One that's less complex, still gets to the learning outcome, but less complex. For a student that might not be as gifted, or it might not come as easy. We might have to unpack it a little bit and scaffold it up to increase the complexity. Where this student over here, I can give them a complex task right away. The outcome's still the same in getting to where you want them, what you want them to know and be able to do. Yeah. But it lends a teacher to say, what's the purpose of the assignment? And what's the structure of it so I can meet the needs of all students? You see how there's a relationship to grading to then the purpose of your assignments, because when you give kids things to do. So practice can go into it. Comparing other students, which is a flaw. Why should you be compared? Why should my performance be compared to yours?
Great, that's a big discussion.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
We do it all the time. And there's some pros and cons to that under certain conditions. But when we're talking about taking kids, and we could take it K-16 to the university level. You take any course, what's the purpose of a course? We want to have someone go through the course to learn something and be able to do something. Okay? So if that's the outcome, what are we measuring it against? So what's our criteria? Now, sometimes we compare it to other students or other performers. There's some merit to that because they kind of set the standard as to what it should be.
So if they're making enrollment decisions too, right? You would want to see the benefits of one individual over another in some circumstances.
Yes, in some circumstances. Yeah. That's another related issue to this, because some will push back and say, yeah, but our universities are still on a 4-point scale. Our universities are still using standardized tests to move forward. Our universities are doing X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm.
But it'd start with you. It would start here.
Yeah, it would start in K-12, but and that movement has already started. There are universities now, as we kind of talk about comparison, because that's the thing. Well, you have to meet certain standards or a certain criteria to get into a university. Well, part of those standards is, what's your GPA? Yeah. Did you take these courses? That kind of thing. And universities are moving more of a profile of a student than saying just your GPA and your ACT score, which it used to be that way years ago. Mm-hmm. They've now broadened and saying, we're looking at the whole kind of, what evidence do we have that this person's going to be successful at the college or university?
I'll say mine was a complete, this is just an anecdote. I like putting anecdotes. My enrollment decisions were almost, for a lot of state colleges and universities, completely table-based. You had, here's your GPA, here's your ACT or SAT score. Where does that put you on the graph? And that's the decision. Yeah. I had to write a paragraph, like 2 paragraphs for some of my applications, right? No interview, no essay, just ACT score, GPA, why do you want to go here? Couple paragraphs. And that, to me, is crazy, especially knowing that there's interviews and full profiles now. But it's shifting big now.
Yeah, it is shifting. Yeah. And part of it, there's some argument against some of the things I'm saying only in regards to, we need to streamline things. We need to make it clear for students on what we expect performance to be like, that indicates to us that when they come to this university, they're going to be successful. Yeah. We want to increase the chances they're going to be successful. So that's one, but I want to push back on that, because we have a tendency to think university. What about trade schools? What about kids that don't need to go on to a college or university, but they have a high skill set? I think about my little brother who drives big rigs and hauls equipment. Well, there's things he needs to know and to be able to do. One, he's got to load equipment on a trailer, and there's a whole set of steps to go through that in a safe way so nobody gets killed. Yeah. That's pretty serious. Yeah. And you got to learn that skill set. And we can look at that and go, they're just putting a big thing and hauling it. Well, no, you got to get it on the trailer. Yeah. You've got to safely hook it up. And if you were to have an accident and that trailer falls off, you're liable. You have to meet certain laws and regulations. You got to know where you can travel. Yeah. You have to have a certain license that you have to earn to show that you're competent to drive that rig and then haul certain things. There's a whole set of things. I mean, it's more complex than people want to give.
And that's step one. Yeah, that's just policy and procedure. You don't get to the actual, skill of other, like, are you a good electrician? Not only do you start out well, or are you safe? Do you work well with others? Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the complexity of knowledge and understanding and what you need to do, we have a history in this country of saying, well, the career technical education and career stuff, we need to get kids in college. No, they are equal. Mm-hmm. They are different pathways. They are different. We spread kids out to put them in areas where they want to excel. One's just as important as the other. They're just different roles in society. Right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always bring to there, because when, my youngest son, he did end up going to a trade school, University of Northwestern Ohio. He got involved he's a Mercedes-Benz technician. He's almost a master technician. And the stuff, I don't even try to keep up with him on knowledge about vehicles, because not only is he close to being a master technician with Mercedes-Benz, but he also has transferred a lot of that knowledge to other vehicles and just knowing, right? Yeah. And the complexity of vehicles today, everybody, hooking your phone to a car now and the navigation thing, it's very complex, right? Mm-hmm. So my point is that they're equal roles, and we have to think about, when students go through our educational system, the opportunities for them once they leave are endless, and it just isn't a college or university sitting in academics. We need those people, but we also need a lot of people to spread out. Now, how does that get back to grading, right? Because we kind of got off on a tangent there. Yeah. Well, it's about what goes into the grade, and I guess the other thing is comparing to other students, and then your assessment tools. How you measure learning might be poor, and you might have a poor instrument that measures it. I did some work with a district at the high school level, and we were in one of the departments, and they had brought me in to help them upgrade and get better with their final exams. And so there were a number of things that we had talked about, and that I taught them about how to go through and move in the direction of standardized-based grading. I said, well, let's first get through an analysis of your current assessment. We want to salvage what's good there. Let's assume there's some good stuff there, because you put some time into this. Mm-hmm. And they felt the same way. Yeah, there's some good. I said, let's see what we got there. So I taught them how to analyze a final exam. It turned out they had 130 items on their final exam. And 30 items all pointed to the same area of learning. Is that a good thing or bad thing? Well, how important is that item that you're pointing 30 questions to? How much evidence do you need from a student on that exam about that particular item? Which is one of the questions you have to ask yourself. So sometimes what goes into it are poorly designed instruments or things that we use to gather learning. And we're moving away from the mindset, it's got to be an exam. The kid's got to sit down and they've got to fill out that paper and answer those questions. Really? What if I have a student who may have test anxiety or doesn't like sitting down and taking tests and gets kind of rattled, just can't think because they just get rattled by it. But I can have a conversation with them and they can articulate whatever I need to know from them and they can verbalize it. Is that good evidence? See where it leads us to really think about the instruments. So there's a lot that goes into these grades. Now, you had said something earlier about what's the solution. Well, for the last 20 years, we've been kind of going against and trying to figure this out. And I said an emotional topic when we began the podcast. And by the way, there's so much more to talk about here because there's so many moving parts with this and to move forward. But it is an emotional topic because people are so tied to that 100% scale, thinking it tells them something about learning, and it's tied to our university system, and the idea of getting an A is an honorable thing, and that's what we strive for. But in the end, when you talk about everything that goes into a grade, do they really mean anything? Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And so in order to fix that, there's a number of things that are happening. A lot of great people have done a number of things to move forward. And part of that moving in that direction is thinking about how you want to deal with those issues. And there are some districts in this country that jumped out and said, all right, we're going to standards-based grading. And it blew up because they thought, everybody's going to agree with this. Everybody's going to understand this. We can easily tell them what we're doing and they're going to buy on and we'll be all set. There were families that went to school boards that were livid about this changeover and moving in the direction of standards-based grading. And the problem is that the messaging wasn't done. It wasn't like, hey, let's explore this idea. Let's not change what we're doing right now. Let's explore this idea first. Let's make sure we get on the same page. Let's create common knowledge. Let's study this. Take some time to go talk about it. Let's have some pushback on it.
Yeah.
Hold us accountable for this idea. There wasn't that kind of approach. And so it got a really bad publicity and messaging that standards-based grading, this is, what are you doing to our school system? And we created that problem ourselves with the way we went about doing it. So what's happening now is a gradual movement. So as we move forward, you'll think about, should we give zeros? Well, what does a zero do? So let's just take this one piece and you kind of unpack the piece to figure out what you can do with it. Well, with zeros, why would we give a zero? Well, teachers have a lot of different reasons. You didn't complete it on time. You didn't do enough of it, or you didn't do it at all. So in the end, if we really want our grade to mean something, how does a zero impact that? And it takes away from meaning. So then we go back to, if we were to talk more about just that zero, let's get rid of zeros as a district. But why would we do that? What does it do for us? That takes us back to an area a district has to explore, or a group of educators to say, what's our purpose of grading? Why do we give a grade? Is it to get them into a university? That's the fundamental question. What's the purpose of grading? Oh, well, we got to give report cards. Well, that could be a purpose. Well, we have to turn in something to the state. Could be. But what does it matter what the mark is? Why is it an A? Why is it a B? Elementary, we use SU, satisfactory, understanding. Some are using not there yet. What does it all mean? Does it matter the mark?
Plus.
Check plus? Yeah. Check is not good enough. You got to put a plus sign. Well, what does a plus sign mean? And how do I get that plus sign? Is that a good thing? Right? So then it says, you get back to the fundamental thing. What's our purpose of grading? And when a group of educators can really answer that question, then you can start to explore these other areas. If our purpose of grading is to provide student overall feedback, some type of mark that gives them some type of feedback of how well they met the standards in the course, because we're all standards-based. And I want to go on a quick tangent.
Yeah.
The difference now than it was when I started to teach in the late 80s, early 90s, I was handed a student textbook and said, go for it.
So you were teaching in the 80s and 90s?
Late 80s,
you don't look a day
90s.
Older than 30.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But when I was handed a textbook, I decided the what and the how. Okay, so now we're in the age, the what is non-negotiable. Each state has said, here's the what of each of the courses. Those are our standards. The how is the craft of the teacher. There's a difference there. There's a big difference, which is a whole nother podcast, by the way.
Oh, yeah. We got many parts coming up.
So when you, when in a standards-based environment, then you can say, well, our goal of grading is, if we know our standards for each course that we have K-12, then what we should be giving a mark on is how successful the student was meeting the criteria for those standards. So the solution is you've got to deal with some issues, late work, zeros, and the big heavy lift is really designing performance level indicators. And I'll kind of give you one example, and this might be something we explore at another time. If in U.S. history, for example, a student, we want them to articulate their understanding of our founding documents, okay? Well, we would go to the standard at that high school course and say, okay, what does the standard say? Let's unpack that. Because the evidence we want from the student is what the standard's saying. So then we would write statements that would kind of be tiered out, and we would say, here's the level where they meet the standard. We would want every student to kind of give us this information so we could go, all right, they're there, and they met the standard. They've met it. Okay. Now, the point is, and I think, listeners need to leave this podcast about grading, is you're never going to get to a completely objective system. There will always be subjectivity. You can't eliminate it. You can remove some of it or approach objectivity. but you'll never completely eliminate subjectivity because we're humans and we have opinions and we have different ideas and we have different interpretations, we have different backgrounds. So when you look at a standard, that's why you have to unpack them as a group. You're going to unpack them a little bit differently. You're going to think, well, I think the writer really meant this. And that's a really great conversation because you can really get into the weeds and unpack it and have some common understanding of what is our purpose of this class by looking at those standards, right? And so once you do that, then you can get into writing performance level indicators for the big parts of that course. Yeah. And it relates to grading. And I'll kind of close out this introductory piece that has taken a lot of our time because this is a really big topic.
Oh yeah, I could listen to this for hours. But yeah.
I don't know if they would though. I don't know. It depends on where they are in this. It really, you get to unpacking those standards and then designing what that course is and saying, here's what we think these standards mean. Yeah. And then looking at those and saying, well, we can't assess everything. Because all the standards, I think Bob Marzano was one years ago who looked at all the standards and they did an analysis to see if all of the standards that were at, I don't remember the state, but it was a kind of a general thing, that if you taught and assessed every standard K to 12, that was currently put on teachers to do, kids would be in school till they were like 25 or 26. So there's way too much to teach. Yeah, there's way too much. And there's way too much to assess. So part of it is the idea of sampling. You really have to sample where they are and make inferences from those samples of student learning.
All right, so we got, sampling. You just mentioned, you had mentioned, a part 2 to this. I've got a lot of ideas. I'm going to make you a regular. You have instilled yourself as a regular, but I know you got a place to be. We've covered a lot. So we'll transition. Every episode of the podcast ends with a win. You've done it before. You've heard them all basically at this point. So can you share a win with us from the last couple weeks?
Yeah, I think, and I might be accused of giving you the same one, but remember, I'm relatively new here.
If it's still a win, then it's a win.
It's still a win, and it relates to this topic here because I've started to have some conversations with staff. And I go back to the staff that is a part of MIPS. And when I started to introduce some of these ideas and having the instructional staff think about some of the issues, and I use that approach. Hey, why don't you start thinking about this? We're not changing anything now. Just start thinking about it. They're receptive. All right, let's talk about it. All right, yeah. It wasn't putting up a guard. It wasn't saying, oh, what are you talking about? We don't have time to change things. It was, all right, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. So I go back to the staff again because over the last several weeks, there's been a lot of conversation and some obstacles we've run into, and they're like, okay, let's not focus on what caused it, although that can inform us how we move forward. How are we fixing this? Let's move forward. And that theme is continuing and continuing. So what that does is it's really enlightened that you can easily address issues. And when you bring in topics like this that are very emotional, like grading, it's because of the people. It's pretty easy to do because you know they're going to be receptive. And that's a huge win because you can talk to all kinds of people and there's sometimes conflict with people and we don't always get along. But we are very blessed to have wonderful people at MIPS. And so I continue with that win.
I love that. Well, Roy, you're my win for the day. This was wonderful. I've already got a bunch of ideas of coming back, but thank you for taking the time and thank you for spilling this great information. So I loved it.
Eric, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks. Reimagining Education is brought to you by Michigan International Prep School. If you'd like to learn more about us and what we do, head to our website at miprepschool.org. That's miprepschool.org. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We will talk to you soon.